Let us first remind ourselves of some general points. I started with a very general and provisional sketch of the problem of historicism, and I said that in order to understand that problem, one must turn to a phenomenon preceding historicism, which is the philosophy of history. And philosophy of history we take here in a very limited sense. The notion that there is a historical process which is necessarily and essentially a progressive process, both intellectually and socially. This, quote, idea of progress developed in the 17th and 18th century on the basis of a number of presuppositions which I will now merely enumerate. The real problem would be to understand the connection between these premises. First, science for the sake of power. Science is essentially for the sake of power, and therefore there is an essential harmony between science and society. Science for the sake of production of goods and services. Second, understanding is itself a kind of production. To understand means to construct or to make. 3. To understand means to construct as evident, as necessary, as the product of a necessary process. And in principle, everything can be understood that way. From this there follows the possibility of a genesis of reason and changes of reason as a necessary process. This necessary process is a part of the whole cosmic process as a necessary process. Fourth, in a classical atomism, there were assumed qualitatively different atoms differing regarding shape and size. But this must be understood from the new basis as derivative from a homogeneous medium which we may call moved matter. They must be everything specific, an atom of a specific shape and size, must be understood as having come into being. But what about moved matter itself? Moved matter, at any rate, has not come into being, but is eternal or sempiternal. Answer, no. Moved matter is itself the product of a process, indeed of a process of a very peculiar kind. Moved matter is an intellectual construct, and therefore something which has a genesis. The ultimate is then the constructing intellect of man. Yet this constructing intellect of man must itself be construed as a product of moved matter. The classic representation of this view is really false. Now, number 5. The preceding premise implies a polarity of matter and intellect or mind, or differently stated, a polarity of nature and mind. Mind being here understood as a human in man, that which makes man human. This polarity means, in more simple terms, civilization or progress is the fact of man's becoming the master of nature, of man's conquering nature. You conquer only an enemy. The relation of man and nature is a rebellion against nature. I leave it at this enumeration, and the real task of analysis would be to understand the connection between these items. Now we turn to Rousseau, and at first glance, Rousseau's decisive influence on this problem is his awareness that the intellectual progress is moral and political regress, or to state it more cautiously, intellectual progress is something fundamentally different from the moral and political progress. This had a decisive influence on Kant. Now I will first read to you a few passages from Kant on this subject. These are all posthumous statements found among the Kant's papers, not published by him. I have read to you one of these passages, I think. So there is first a general remark about Rousseau's impression one gets when reading the writings of Rousseau. There was an outstanding sagacity and a very soul full of feeling, which perhaps no other writer of any age or any people has had combined such a combination of sagacity and feeling. The second impression is the repulsion by the strange and absurd opinions which are opposed to everything which is generally accepted, so that one can easily get arrived at the suspicion that the author wished to prove we wish to exhibit his extraordinary talents and the charm of eloquence. And then, so this much about general impression, so you see Kant was not completely charmed by Rousseau, although he was very interested. And then there comes this passage which I read in the last time, and I think that I should read again. I myself am a man of inquiry, out of inclination. I feel the whole thirst for knowledge, and what is begeering?
Eagerness.
Begeering, yeah, very good. The eager hunger to make advance in knowledge, and as well as the satisfaction at every progress. There was a time where I believed that all this could constitute the honor of mankind, and I despise the vulgar who knows nothing of it. Rousseau has brought me into state like Jacob. This illusory preference, many of the scholars of scientists, disappears. I learn to honor men in order not longer to see the honor of man in intellectual activity. And I would regard myself as much more useless than the common laborers if I did not believe that this reflection, we don't know which is right, it's not reflection, gives a value to all others for the purpose of establishing the rights of mankind. So what he learned from Rousseau is then the denial of the supremacy of theoria, of contemplation, of theoretical understanding. And that means at the same time the respect for the dignity of every man. Given the so-called contemplative idea, the respect is strictly given only to the man of contemplation, or to others to the extent to which they are potential contemplators. But from this new point of view, the respect is given to every man. The justification of philosophy is that it contributes to the establishment or the recognition of the rights of mankind. Let us see, I mentioned 3 points by themselves. The first, the critique of contemplation, i.e. of pure theoretical reason in the name of morality, of which we have this document in Rousseau in the first discourse on art and science, and the supremacy of morality. This notion of the supremacy of morality has a long history behind Rousseau. For example, Socrates at first glance appears as such a man. The one thing needful is moral virtue, and philosophy is in some way in the service of that. But this view took on, and therefore the name Socrates plays a great role in Rousseau. The second point is that in the early 17th century, the people try to find some basis for peace among the various religious groups. And for some time it seemed that some general recognition of Christianity would be sufficient for establishing peace. Men like Leibniz hope that there would be, if not a reunion, at least some arrangement between the Catholics and Protestants on the basis of the recognition of the common Christianity. But then some people went beyond that and said the only basis regarding which all men can agree is morality. And therefore the only criterion, the only demand which political society can make on its citizens can only be of a moral kind and not of a religious kind. So that played a great role in the 17th and 18th century, and is also, of course, implied in what Rousseau and Kant are doing. Now, the second point which I mentioned on the basis of Kant's statement just quoted, Kant has a very particular notion of morality. Morality appears here to mean recognition of the rights of mankind, of the rights of man. That is a specific interpretation of morality. For example, if you take the traditional notion of morality or virtue, that could not properly be expressed in these terms, although it might imply it. We shall see later on, when we turn to Kant's foundation of the Metaphysics of Morals, that at the beginning Kant establishes thesis the only thing which can be truly valuable is the goodwill. And in this connection he speaks of all the various virtues, say temperance and courage, and tries to show that they are not as themselves valuable. The goodwill makes it valuable. And he mentions all the virtues, except one, because that he felt instinctively, I believe, rather than that he thought of it valuable, it wouldn't make sense. It's justice. Courage, in the looser sense of the word, can be misused. Temperance, in the looser sense, can be misused. Think of the miser who is temperate in order to be perfectly good at money making. And wisdom can also be misused. Think of clever accounting. But justice cannot be misused. Doesn't make sense. So in other words, there is in Kant a tendency to conceive of virtue primarily in terms of justice, i.e. the social virtue par excellence. And a further step, by no means identical to this one, would be to say justice consists fundamentally in the recognition of the rights of man. Those who have studied Hobbes or Locke a bit will see how this was prepared. That was prepared by Hobbes and Locke. But that's for later conception. Number 3, the third point implies that theoretical progress is different from moral progress. Morality is not necessarily furthered by intellectual progress. To some extent, it is even hindered by it. This much about this position. I turn now to another passage which is not here, which is in a published writing of Kant, in his Metaphysics of Morals, in the German edition which I used on page 141. Well, I state only the main point. Happiness, Kant says, the consideration of happiness speaks perhaps in favor of the state of nature, as distinguished from civil society. But morality speaks decisively in favor of civil society against the state of nature. What Kant here implies is the consideration of morality is radically different from the consideration of happiness, that which is a series going written large all over Kant. I'm now interested only in noting the fact that this very new distinction, this new separation of morality and happiness has a root in Rousseau. It's written before, I haven't seen this before. It is clear that up to Kant, Are you familiar with that? Up to Kant, the general, all philosophic morality did not distinguish, but did not separate happiness from morality. The happy life, the moral life, or it's a virtue life. Maybe there are higher forms of virtues and moral virtues, that I do not go into. But the happy life is a virtue life. So in other words, the vulgar notion, the vulgar concept of happiness, that we see a gangster or another crook living in Palm Beach was not regarded as happiness. Simply had lots of sensual pleasures, maybe. He could never be happy because it is particular and worthless human being cannot be happy. Because happiness means a state of contentment which is enviable, to give it somewhat. Considerations of happiness as happiness are wholly alien to morality. Eudaimonism, eudaimonism, that is to say, concern with happiness, is fatal to morality. I exaggerate a bit. Now, this is prepared by Rousseau, I say, because Rousseau explicitly said when he spoke of these men of the state of nature, the savages, they are happy and they are good, compassion, but they are not virtuous, they are not moral, because they have no sense of duty. Out of simple kindness of their heart, their compassion underplay the fine torture afflicted on some people by some Red Indians. But fundamentally, all right, let us forget about these minor difficulties. The simple savage, compassionate, and happy in his simplicity, but not virtuous. And that meant that civilized man is, in the highest case, a virtuous man. But by definition, he cannot be truly good and not be truly happy, because civilization prevents him from being truly good and truly happy. Why he cannot be good, kind, that is clear, because of those point of view, civilized society means property owning, private property owning society. And the property owner and everyone connected with private property can, for this reason, not be simply compassionate. Property owner needs to be hard somewhere that you can figure out. And that is, by the way, the point there is an immediate way from Rousseau to Marx, which I cannot go on. So the point which I am concerned now is only this. This divorce of happiness and morality is really implied in Rousseau, I think. And that's another point which comes out from that. Now, but what do all these things have to do with history, or the problem of progress with which we are concerned? Another quotation. Rousseau proceeds synthetically and begins with natural man. I proceed analytically and begin with civilized man. You see, by the way, how immediately interesting Rousseau is to Kant's own investigations and inquiries. He defines his own procedure in contrast to Rousseau's. Rousseau begins synthetically, that means he begins with natural man and follows him on his way to civilized. Kant begins, he says, with civilized man. Now from this it seems to follow that Rousseau's procedure, Rousseau needs history. He has to follow this history. And of course Rousseau didn't need it particular because of the very sweeping character of his statements, but if his study had to be carried on with precision, he would have to fall back on one point or another on history. Kant, by proceeding analytically, from civilized man by looking at us and himself doesn't need history to think. Yet, there is an implicit historicity in Kant's formulation of the problem. Kant does not begin with man, civilized man. That makes a difference. Kant's doctrine deals with man, qua civilized man, and that in this formulation is an indication of the presence of the God of history, not more than that. And now the last statement from Rousseau, from Kant. Newton was the first to see order and regularity combined with great simplicity, where prior to him one found disorder and multiplicity, terribly connected. Since his time, comets are running in geometrical curves. Rousseau was the first to discover, beneath the multiplicity of human appearance, the deeply hidden nature of man, and the hidden law, according to which providence is justified by Rousseau's discovery. Prior to him, the objection of Alphonsus and Manet was still valid. After Newton and Rousseau, God is vindicated, and now Hope's theorem, i.e. whatever that is true. And Hope's theorem is true. He doesn't quote that theorem, but one can know that whatever is best. Yeah? So that is the last of the statements of Kant and Rousseau which we have to consider. By the way, the name Manet, Alphonsus we don't know. Manet is the originator of the sect of the Manichaeans. Mani is now called. And Manichaeans, which means there is a good and an evil principle. The world is, as we know it, is the work of a good principle fighting with an evil one. The world is not simply good. The refutation of Mani means that the world is simply good. It is the best of all possible worlds. That has been proven by Rousseau regarding human things, whereas regarding the cosmic phenomena, it has been proven by Newton. Now, what does this mean? To Rousseau as the Newton of the moral world, as a vindicator of providence. Kant has here in mind the discourse on the origin of inequality. Now, I have spoken of this before. The difficulty in the last meeting, the difficulty implied in the distinction between natural man and civilized man. The moral law, or the natural law, cannot be known to, is not in fact known to all men. And the natural law is not duly promulgated to all men. Now these men, these cannibals for example, are excused because they don't know the wickedness of cannibalism. But still, it is not the effect of a moral God not to promulgate the moral law to all men duly, to which Rousseau implies by implication. God could have done it only by a miracle, and it is more becoming an absolutely wise being not to use any miracle. The fact that the natural law was not promulgated to all men at the beginning and became known only in the course of history is a proof of the wisdom and therefore of the excellence of God. The fact that the savages, or many savages, do not know the moral law is due not to negligence or indifference or powerlessness on the part of God, but to necessity, to wisdom. It redounds to the glory of God that he was able to construct a world which does not need God's interference in order to be the best of all possible. That's what Kant indicates. The good life, Rousseau says, is a moral life. One crucial qualification. What I'm going to say about Rousseau applies only to that Rousseau, to that means only that part of Rousseau, which is interesting to Kant. Rousseau is infinitely more complex, and one can say that at least half of Rousseau was of no interest. So this is qualification. The good life is a moral life, as distinguished from the contemplative life. There is a tension between morality and intellectuality. Intellectual progress is not moral progress. The moral principles are given by the conscience. There is no need for theoretical knowledge in order to be moral. Yet, the conscience is threatened by false theories. Therefore, we need a kind of wisdom in order to protect the conscience against these false theories. Let us call this pursuit Socratic wisdom. Socratic wisdom is needed in order to protect the conscience against false theories. This Socratic wisdom, however, must have a theoretical basis. What is the theoretical basis of Socratic wisdom? Now, in this respect, there is great obscurity in Rousseau. There are two poles within which Rousseau moves. The one is a materialistic deterministic cosmology, as sketched in the discourse on the origin of inequality. The other is a certain deism and dualism, rather heretical, sketched and developed even in the professional faith of the Savoyard vicar in Rousseau's Emile. I don't know if there is anyone among you who or all of you have read the Emile or know anything about it. But in the Emile is a work on education, a classic. And at a certain moment in the education of a young man called Emile, whose educator is none other than Rousseau himself, this young man has to be introduced into theology, into teaching of God, because Rousseau prevented him hearing the very word God until he was about 17 or 18, because he was sure that anything he would say about God to him at an earlier stage would be grossly misunderstood, because he would have too much to crude notions and aspects. Now, in this context, Rousseau gives the theology. But he does not give the theology in his own name, but in the name of a very heretical Catholic faith. And now there is a great question. Rousseau does not identify himself with the Catholic faith. And that is very ambiguous, because this teaching includes the denial of miracles and the denial of the createdness of matter and some other very important denials. So either the Savoyard vicar said things which Rousseau would have not have dared to say, so that as it were, if I may use a simple political simile, if this is the Savoyard creed, Rousseau may have been on the right of it, meaning more conservative. He may also have been on the left of it, more progressive. No one can say that and answer this question without having made such a study. Up to now has never been made. At any rate, to come back to the main point, the theoretical basis of Rousseau's Socratic wisdom is extremely dark, which doesn't mean that there are not many books in existence in which, with the utmost confidence, he will say this is where the theology is. That is one of the characteristics of scholarship, and one has only the confidence. There is something more. Rousseau makes an attempt, at least in one hand, to be neutral in what he says. Let us take that the simple alternatives are materialism and spiritualism, to give an account which is indifferent to the conflict between materialism and spiritualism. He does it in the following way. He says the characteristic difference of man, that is where distinguished man of the truth, is not rationality, but freedom. A very powerful sentence of enormous historical content. Not rationality, but freedom. And we will find the traces of this statement in Kant. But then he goes on to say, since freedom is not universally admitted, he will limit himself to saying something which will be granted by everyone, by materialists as well as by spiritualists, and that is that man is perfectible, not free. So I'm concerned only with this aspect of the thing that Rousseau tries to make that this one attempt to be neutral in the great metaphysical context. Where he stood, that is very hard to say. Rousseau moves somehow between these two opposites, deterministic materialism and deism, where we do not know. Now, Socratic wisdom, which is required for protecting the conscience, would seem to demand that this question, the metaphysical question, be settled. Kant settled it by his critique of pure reason. I would like to state the problem in a clear term in which Kant states that this alternative, atheism, theism, determinism, recognition of freedom, materialism, and immortality of the soul. That was grouped in Kant's style most of the issues, and Rousseau agrees with that. Atheism versus theism is determinism versus recognition of freedom, and materialism versus recognition of immortality of the soul. As I say, Rousseau does not explicitly and clearly settle this issue, so we do not know where he stands. Kant tried to settle it by his critique of pure reason. Now, what enabled Kant, or rather what stimulated him to settle this question in the peculiar way in which he settled it, was Hume's critique of causality. Critique of causality that seems to offer an interesting possibility. To criticize causality, universal determinism, might be thought to mean to find room for freedom. Hume does exactly the opposite. His doubt of causality, it can be called doubt, implies the impossibility of freedom. The impossibility of freedom is in no way accepted by any capital doubt Hume has had regarding causality. This we must see clearly, otherwise we will not understand what Kant is about. I'll read you a passage from this part 3, section 1 of the Treatise of Human Nature. It is universally acknowledged that the operations of external bodies are necessary, and that is the communication of their motion in their attraction and mutual cohesion. They are not the least traces of indifference or liberty. Every object is determined by an absolute fate to a certain degree and direction of its motion, and can no more depart from that precise line in which it moves, that it can convert itself into an angel or spirit or any superior substance. The actions, therefore, of matter are to be regarded as instances of necessary action. And whatever is in this respect on the same footing with matter must be acknowledged to be necessary. We may know whether this be the case with the actions of the mind. We shall begin with examining matter, and considering on what the idea of the necessity in its operations are founded, and why we conclude one body or action to to be the infallible cause of knowledge. Although infallible is a very unusual expression. It has been observed already that in no single instance the ultimate connection of any object is discoverable, either by our senses or reason, and that we can never penetrate so far into the essence and construction of bodies as to perceive the principle on which their mutual influence depends. That is the meaning of Rousseau's critique of causality. It is their constant union alone with which we are acquainted, and it is from the constant union the necessity arises. If objects had not a uniform and regular conjunction with each other, we should never arrive at any idea of cause and effect. And even after all, the necessity which enters into that idea is nothing but a determination of the mind to pass from one object to its usual attendant and infer the existence of one from that of the other. Here then are two particulars which we are to consider as essential necessities, namely the constant union and the influence of the mind. And wherever we discover these, we must acknowledge a necessity. And now then we apply to the necessity, look at the action of the mind, whether we do not find here also constant union and the influence of the mind. And we do, hence, the actions of the mind, and especially the actions of the will, are as necessary for the falling of a body or any other action of man. So Kant did not turn to Hume in order to learn from Hume's critique of causality, to find to Hume's critique of causality a loophole that is there for freedom. Question: what then did he learn from Hume? And with this, I give the word to Mr. Holland. I would like to give, in other words, a provisional answer to this question as to what Kant learned by thinking through Hume's critique of causality. I say as follows. Kant found, or believed, that Hume starts from a premise, which was the premise of the whole tradition as Kant saw it. And this premise can be stated as follows. All judgments are either analytical or else synthetic judgments a posteriori. There are no synthetic judgments a priori. Now, I must explain this. It's hard to explain, I can only reproduce Kant's definition. An analytical judgment is a judgment in which the predicate is implied in the subject. Kant did not mean tautological judgment as he frequently understood, but in which the predicate is implied in the subject. Now what would you see in a simple example? Man is a mortal animal. Yeah? Man is a mortal animal, analytical judgment. When we think man, we think mortal animal. We do not learn anything new from it. What is synthetic judgment? A synthetic judgment, generally speaking, is one where the predicate is not implied in the subject. If you say, Mr. Crosby smokes, that is certainly a synthetic judgment from every point of view, because it has never been seen before. We have to look at it and to experience of this very unusual case, we learn the unheard of that. So synthetic judgment a priori is a judgment in which the predicate is connected with the subject on the basis of experience. That is sense experience. A synthetic judgment a priori would be a judgment in which the predicate is connected with the subject, is not implied in the subject, but connected by evident necessity, and yet not implied in the subject. Therefore, a synthetic judgment a priori can, of course, not possibly be derived from experience, because from experience should never be an a priori judgment. Now, what Kant claims to be the most important example, at least on the first level, of a synthetic judgment a priori is the principle of causality. According to Kant, it is impossible to deduce from the concept of a thing, or say even an event, that it is necessarily preceded by a cause which brought it about. And yet, on the other hand, it is absolutely impossible to derive a universal principle like causality from experience, because experience can tell you never more than up to now. And if you say up to now, there has never been a case where an event has not been preceded by a cause, a necessary cause. In the first place, it's not proved by experience how many events have passed unobserved. But even if they could change any second now. So it's a principle of causality without which science is altogether impossible, according to Kant. It cannot be an analytic judgment, it cannot be a synthetic judgment a priori. A posteriori, it must be synthetic judgment a priori. In order to understand the possibility of synthetic judgments a priori, Kant has to develop a notion which in this form is entirely original in him, of the spontaneity of the understanding as understanding, and say, if you want to, reason as reason, by a spontaneous act, connects this fundamental synthesis, this spontaneity of understanding. Synthetic judgments a priori are, taken as a whole, the necessary condition of experience. Experience doesn't mean sense data or sense impression. Sense impressions are isolated, fragmentary, meaningless things. They become experience through interpretation. And this interpretation is fundamentally affected by the act of the pure understanding, the spontaneous act of the pure understanding. The pure understanding, in no way empirical, constitutes any possible object of experience. That is very misleading expression. The general character of any possible object of experience is established by spontaneous acts of the understanding. This is, of course, what the pure understanding does by circumscribing the general character of any object of understanding. Is not yet an actual object of experience. It is a form. The form can only be experienced by experience and ultimately by sense data. Now, if this is so, we understand from here how a true science is possible. A science based on a universal validity and evident necessity, and yet, while this same science can become actual only of sensible objects, because it is so that a possible object of experience becomes an actual object of experience. Sense perception is required. There cannot be any knowledge of non-sensible beings, suprasensible beings, if there are. There cannot be any knowledge of God and soul. In other words, the atheistic, deterministic, materialistic science is absolutely necessary, and there is no possibility to interfere with it on any ground. It is impossible in the study of sensible phenomena to find something like a miracle. Absolutely important. Because in every case, if you are confronted with the explanation of a phenomenon as miracle, you you always will be compelled, according to Kant, to raise third questions into the peculiar specific conditions of this phenomenon, which on the basis of previous knowledge would be a miracle, but where the scientists would say we may have to change the somewhat narrow notion of natural phenomena which we have given. There cannot be any knowledge, any theoretical knowledge, of suprasensible things and their action. But, and now we come to the crucial turn, this whole knowledge, pre-scientific or scientific, is only knowledge of the phenomenal world. It is only the knowledge of the phenomenal world precisely because this cooperation of human reason with sense perception constitutes. It is not knowledge of the things as they are in themselves, or to use a strange Kantian expression, of the thing in itself. Yet there is a kind of knowledge of a purely rational kind, of a purely rational character, which is incompatible by its very nature with dependence on experience. Our theoretical knowledge, say our understanding of causality, is essentially dependent on experience in this sense that it points us to experience for its fulfillment. The general principle of causality is in itself doesn't reveal to you anything if it is not applied in the causal analysis of sensible things. It is now, but there is a kind of purely rational knowledge which is incompatible with dependence on experiencing anything, and that is moral knowledge, knowledge of the moral law. This is knowledge, but knowledge of an absolutely suprasensible kind, and therefore knowledge in the sense of the thing itself, of true reality. Now, moral knowledge, the knowledge of the moral law, stands and falls by freedom, and also by God and the immortality of soul. Therefore, metaphysics, knowledge of freedom, God, and the immortality of the soul, is possible, but only in a practical respect. It is not possible as theoretical or speculative metaphysics. That is a very crude statement of how Kant, of the character of the general character of Kant's reply to Hume. This is an atheistic, deterministic, realistic view. Is inherent and perfectly legitimate in every theoretical understanding. But it is also equally true that this is only an understanding of the phenomenal, not of true reality. Of true reality we have an inkling only through the conscience. And the conscience enables us, and to a certain extent even compels, postulate the existence of God and the immortality of the soul. Now let us see what Mr. Hoppe has succeeded in extracting from the preface to the Prolegomenon. Thank you very much, Mr. Hoppe. Now, I do not know whether I made clear a conclusion I had in mind when I gave my extremely sketchy the summary of what Kant learned by thinking through Hume's theory of causality. Now, I think the following thing must have appeared, that Kant, by his theory of causality, showed Rousseau's problem, the status of Socratic wisdom, and the question of the dependence of the Socratic wisdom on theoretical science, physics or metaphysics, at least in the following way. Kant proved or claimed the supremacy of morality by having shown, by proven, the fundamental inadequacy of theory of contemplation, our theoretical faculty does not permit to understand more than the merely phenomenal. And there is no possibility of a theoretical metaphysics at all. The highest knowledge of which man is capable is the knowledge of the moral law. And this knowledge is accessible to every human being as human being. There is no superiority in the decisive possible. In a secondary way, there are such superiorities. And if the question arises how to defend the conscience with the zone against all theory, that is not everybody's business. That requires a very great effort, as Kant pointed out, for example, in the introduction to the Prolegomenon, which Mr. Hoppe proposed. So now let us turn. I see already what will happen. I believe I shall not be able to do today what I wanted to do, but we will discuss now somewhat more closely the introduction to the Prolegomenon. And next time there will be no paper. Mr. Pullen, so yeah, you are free. And I suppose the whole paper. But we will study the prefaces, the two prefaces, especially the second preface, which is the seat of pure reason, and also certain other prefaces of the book of pure reason. And for this purpose, I urge you to get copies of the book of pure reason. I mean, please don't need it. I don't urge you to buy it, because we won't need it more than for this single meeting. But there are copies in the library, and I do not know how many, but it is probably a matter of first come, first serve. But still, if we have, say, about 10 or 12 copies, 2 or 3 which we could look in the text what we discussed. So, now, first one question, what did you mean by the bottleneck? That I found a very interesting observation, but I wasn't quite sure I understood.
I found the bottleneck consisted that on one hand, it says the deduction of these concepts, metaphysics, was a very difficult thing because it had utilized previous metaphysical achievements in solving or in proving the basis of metaphysics. On the other hand, he assumed, and as a matter of fact, more explicitly said one of the places, that in order to investigate pure reason, the only tool we can use is pure reason. So I think this is a contradiction. Why can you use pure reason? Why is pure reason not sufficient to examine itself, while metaphysics is incapable of participating in it, likewise in its own analysis of validity?
Yeah, may I make a pedagogic remark?
Yes.
As an old man. Don't face so quickly a contradiction.
I mean, difficulty.
No, I would say in our very informal discussions here, one should always use the strongest word so that there will be no, you don't have to be of course here. But I know that some people, even in later life, even in writing, publishing, they speak so easily of the non-communal contradiction without taking consider that this is only a difficult, an apparent contradiction. Now, but this is a difficulty which you refer is a very serious. Whether Kant solves it or not is a very long question. And that is it. Kant says that we can have knowledge properly only of sensible phenomena. Let me omit now the problem of mathematics, which of course is the case, but let us take a simple version. Knowledge of phenomena on the problem. I can enlarge it again. We can have only knowledge of phenomena. Let me begin again. It is a correct statement. I noticed that it is difficult. What about mathematics? What is the status of mathematical knowledge? Is mathematical knowledge is not knowledge of sensible phenomena. When you study verbal, you do not study that thing here. You use only as a help for understanding self, which you don't speak. What is the status of mathematical knowledge in Kant? Yes, but what about the subject matter of mathematics? I mean, let us take a simpler and clearer case of geometry. The geometrical figures are spatial things. Space, pure space, no matter. What about space? What is space? According to Kant. Yeah, more precise form of intuition, not form of intuition. Form of intuition. So, mathematics is based on our pure intuitive, whatever that means. Human knowledge in general is based also, apart from another, there are two forms of intuiting, space and time. They are based also on acts of the understanding proper, basic categories. What does Kant do? Kant, instead of using the category for understanding, say, a comment or a fact, looks at the categories and the forms of intuition and their relations and so on. Correct. Kant, instead of using the category, makes the category seen. Kant's work is distinguished from that which we all do in everyday life and which we do as scientists, and the fact that it is self-knowledge. Self-knowledge not indeed of him as this little Kant, but of him as a rational being. Self-reason, knowing itself. Now, there is of course a very great question indeed. What is the status of this reason knowing itself? Did Kant sufficiently clarify the status of this knowledge? In other words, all knowledge is phenomenon, has to do with phenomena. But a knowledge concerned with the phenomenality, with that which makes possible phenomena, does it not have a radically different status than what it is now? That is indeed a great question, and one can perhaps say this was the starting point of the development of African development. In other words, if not these pure reasons which Kant claims to have discovered in its true character, is this not the thing in itself? Is this not the absolute which is the church that has to gain by the concept? One very quickly one can say that is exactly the point of healing. Again, that the critique of pure reason understood, better understood than Kant understood himself, means that the absolute is now for the first time, the thing in itself, the absolute, is now for the first time perceived without Kant's will. Kant has this very good key, good reason understanding the human mind as a phenomenon world. And then there is somewhere the thing in itself, as such unknown. And here says, well, I cannot go into this argument, all these is an argument. But here fundamental connection is here. That is that which is the ground of the phenomenal world, which makes possible the phenomenal world, the mind. That is no longer phenomenal. That is the thing. That is a very crude thing that must be taken only as such. That is what we are about. Good. Now let us turn to the Prolegomenon, to the introduction, and consider a few passages. Is the division into paragraphs the same as in the German edition? In the fourth paragraph here, on page 41, he says, one may, well, let us read it from the beginning, the fourth paragraph. I suggest that someone else read the random fact. Yeah, good. Who has it?
Yes. If metaphysics is a science?
Yeah, the fourth paragraph.
If metaphysics is a science, how does it happen that it cannot win for itself universal and lasting applause like other sciences? If it is not a science, how is it that under the semblance of a science, it is ceaselessly boasting and holding out to the human mind hopes that are never extinguished and never fulfilled? Something definite must be worked out respecting the nature of this assumed science, whether it demonstrates our knowledge or our ignorance. For it is impossible that metaphysics should remain on the same footing any longer.
Why is this important? Metaphysics always has a duty status. But why can you not quite say, can it go on any longer?
In comparison with the achievements of physical science.
Let me say the next sentence.
It seems almost ridiculous that, while every other science moves forward ceaselessly, this one claiming to be wisdom itself, whose oracular pronouncements everyone can consult, is continually revolving in one spot without advancing a step.
Very speculative. You see, that is quite big. I mean, it's only another indication of the crucial importance of the idea of progress. The mere fact that all the science progress, whereas metaphysics obviously does not progress, is an additional proof of the fact that metaphysics is not a science, or at least not yet a science. And since we are now at an age where we have now clarity about the essentially progressive character of the sciences, we say, put up or shut up. I mean, there is no possibility of going on with a pursuit which is not essentially progressive. That is a novel consideration. Yes?
By essentially progressive, the basic lines, the basic lines will change as the science develops.
That is not in there here. No, but
I'm asking whether what's happening in Strauss, the very character, we thought the basic lines were laid up for.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, that is, since there is science, and that will be taken up in the preface to the Greek of Theory. From Kant's point of view, science doesn't begin before Galileo. And mathematics, of course, is straight, but physics does not begin before Galileo. No, but it is a straight advantage for one reason. We can't know of a single science which was completed, which therefore did stagnate logic. Logic didn't make a single progress since Aristotle. So, the non-progressivity cannot be in itself a good argument. And another consideration, what about Kant's critique of pure reason, Kant's whole critical enterprise itself? Kant was sure that by himself, or maybe by some young people trained by him, it would be finished. This highest of all sciences, the self-knowledge of reason, the new metaphysics, would be finished, completed by Kant or the latest generation after Kant, and then there could not be any further progress. But it's interesting to its reference to the, of course, in a very popular and provisional statement, but it's still revealed. Then we turn to the paragraph to the third paragraph after that. In spite of it, I'm confident of prediction.
At the same time, I confidently dare to predict that the thoughtful reader of these Prolegomena will not only doubt his previous science, but will be quite convinced in the end that such a science cannot exist unless the demands made here have been satisfied, for upon them rests the possibility of metaphysics. Inasmuch as this has never happened, there is as yet no such thing as metaphysics. But since the demand for metaphysics can never disappear, because the interests of universal human reason are so intimately bound up with it, the thoughtful reader will confess that a complete reform, or rather a new birth, is inevitable according to a plan hitherto quite unknown, however much this may be resisted for a time.
Well, that is important. Kant does not say metaphysics is spunk. The utmost he would say is the existing, the previous metaphysics is spunk. What he seeks is the true metaphysics. True metaphysics. And this requires a complete reform, but this expression is not strong enough for him, or rather a new birth. New birth. And what's the difference between these two expressions? A complete reform and a new birth.
Something that doesn't previously exist, born, and implies no previous existence.
In other words, a complete reform would mean there are some elements which should produce, not even yet. Yes. Now let us see. Let us go on and read the sequence.
Since the attempts of Locke and Leibniz, or rather since the first rise of metaphysics, no event has occurred that could be more decisive for the fortunes of this science than the attack made upon it by David Hume. He contributed no new light to this kind of knowledge, but he struck a spark by which a light might have been kindled, had it encountered receptive tinder whose glimmer could have been preserved and enlarged. Hume took for his initial starting point a signal but important conception of metaphysics, namely that of the connection of cause and effect, together with the derivative conceptions of force and action and so forth. He demanded
So it's in the translation is not calling that, and therefore also, the connection of cause and effect, and therefore also of the corollaries. Yeah.
He demanded that reason, which pretends to have given metaphysics birth,
No, metaphysics, the concept of the connection of cause and effect.
give a reasoned answer to the question, by what right does reason think that something else is of such a quality that on its being posited...
Let us get this straight, that you understand. And he, how did he say, and he asked reason, which pretends, to have generated that concept, and the concept of the connection of cause and effect in its, how did he say,
In itself,
well, it's really the way it would mean refer to the Genesis, rather the female gender is a bit quite effect is generated in the female Genesis. No, how did he then say it?
By what right does reason think that something is of such a quality that on its being positive, something else is thereby necessarily also positive? So that is the meaning of the concept of cause. Hume proved irrefutably that it is quite impossible for reason to imagine a connection a priori, and based on a mere concept, since this connection involves necessity. It is not at all apparent how, because something else exists, something else must necessarily exist, and thus how the concept of such a connection can be introduced a priori. Hence Hume concluded that reason completely deceived itself by this concept, that reason falsely claimed this concept as its own child, while it was nothing more than a bastard of the imagination which, conceived by experience, had brought certain representations under the law of association, and had substituted a resulting objective necessity, that is, habit, for an objective necessity based on insight. From this, he concluded that reason possessed no faculty for thinking of such connections, even in general terms, because, if it did, its concepts would then be mere constructs, and all its pretended a priori knowledge, nothing but common experiences mislabeled, which is to say that no such thing as metaphysics exists at all, and that there is no possibility of it ever existing.
By the way, what he said, construct is a bad translation. Erdichtungen. Fiction. Now, so what then does Kant say about Hume's great work? The connection of cause and effect, Hume said as proved, cannot be thought by reason out of concept. What could that mean? Does anyone have an inkling of this discussion prior to Kant? But I give you one example. Leibniz has said that there are two, and that is very important for Kant's own doctrine. Leibniz has said that there are two kinds of verities. Verities of reason and verities of fact. And each of these kinds of verities has a principle of its own. The principle of the verities of reason is the principle of contradiction. So you see here is the origin of Kant's concept of the notion of analytical judgment. The principle of analytical judgment is the principle of contradiction, i.e. you can test the truth of an analytical judgment always without looking at anything, and merely seeing whether the analytical judgment is self-contradictory or not. If you say a circle is square, you don't have to look around you, you only have to remember what you think by a circle. See that the judgment contradicts, the validity contradicts the subject. The principle of contradiction is enough for testing. But as for the verities of fact, Leibniz says, this has the principle not of contradiction, although that is also right, actually, but the principle of sufficient reason, that there is no fact or event which has not a sufficient reason for having come about. As far as I remember, Leibniz lectured at this juxtaposition. And then there came the famous professor, Strauss Center, who prepared Leibniz for university treatment. And among the other things which was did, what was one, he proved or tried to prove the principle of sufficient reason, which is a broader statement of the principle of causality. He tried to reduce the principle of causality from the principle of contradiction. In other words, that the denial of the principle of causality is self-contradictory. Now that has been done before, but from the top there is this system in the corporate, and I do not know the moment the other modern physics well. Do you remember anything, Mr. Gilman? No, I mean in Leibniz.
I know that there are two schools of interpretation related to the
Yeah, which are they?
Russell and Kant say that this deduction is described because of the unedited work.
Yeah.
Kant says that they're true.
Who said?
Kant himself says that they're true.
Yeah, sure. So I thought, yeah. Kant said that they are irreducible according to Leibniz himself.
According to Leibniz himself.
Good. And then there is what Hume tries to show is that it is impossible to deduce the principle of causality from the principle of contradiction. It is not self-contradictory to say that an event happens without having had a cause. It is a very difficult question to which I cannot go here, but it is really worth going into carefully. The question as to how far Hume's thought of causality extends. Recently, the discussion does not go beyond this limited question. Would not say it this way? The one alternative is everything which comes into being comes into being necessarily out of something and through something. And the other alternative, everything which comes into being may come into being out of nothing through an omnipotent God, which of course would not be a denial of causality, but an assertion. There are also some passages of Hume which go beyond that, and that is a difficult question, and which would deserve a very close study. Let us, however, accept Kant's interpretation of Hume as face value. That Hume has proven the principle of causality, the denial of the principle of causality, is not self-contradictory. Then the question arises, how do we know it? And Hume says, Kant is creating us the unsurmountable inclination to expect similar sequence as we have observed in the past. I take a simple example. We have observed in the past that when spring comes, people wear lighter clothes. We have seen this more in winter. We see this year after year, but that is of course not a good example because it occurs only once a year. Somehow not a good example occurs to me at the moment. But we observe that sequence and we observe A followed by B all the time. We have seen that. And we have seen many such sequences. Now this creates an insurmountable inclination to expect B when we observe again. We don't see any necessity of it. The necessity is only a necessity of our getting become accustomed to it. It's no evidence. It's mere quote psychological necessity. There are great questions involved in this very thing, and I use somewhat carelessly the term law of association. What about this? What about Hume's whole enterprise? This is not an attempt to explain science by science with scientific methods. Maybe there are some fundamental question of that. I cannot go into that. And then Kant restates here in his way the result of Hume. Causality is not, in the term of causality, is not evidently necessary. It's not self-contradictory to the mind. What is it stated? Now Kant speaks then in the sequel of the faith of Hume's observation, and people did not understand him, and he mentions here the Scots, especially read Oswald and Beatty, and it was not the question, he says, whether the concept of cause was correct, useful, and indispensable regarding all natural science. For Hume had never questioned that. The question was whether it was thought by reason a priori, and in this way had an inner truth, independent of all experience, and hence also probably a more extended usefulness, which was not limited to objects of experience. Now here Kant indicates the implication of Hume's analysis of causality for metaphysics. Metaphysics is understood by Kant to mean knowledge as science a priori, a science in no way based on experience. That is a concept of metaphysics which is typically modern. One cannot say that Aristotle's metaphysics is altogether independent of experience. It thinks only of the demonstration of the existence of God, which from motion, which Aristotle gives, which of course comes from motion as empirically known. But in any Kant assumes that metaphysics is a strict a priori science. And metaphysics necessarily makes use of the principle of causality. Now, if the principle of causality is not an a priori concept, then metaphysics is such as being an a priori science making use of the principle of causality breaks down. At the end of the next paragraph, the paragraph beginning, the adversaries of the famous man. You have that? The adversaries of the famous man.
Oh, yes.
This is the thing.
To have done the proper with full justice, the opponents of this celebrated man would have had to penetrate deeply into the nature of reason, insofar as it is occupied solely with pure thought, a course which was inconvenient for them. Therefore, they invented a more convenient means by which they might defy him without any insight, namely the appeal to the common sense of mankind. Common sense, or as it has recently been called, plain sense, is indeed a great natural gift to possess.
A great gift of heaven. Why does it change that? Is indeed a great gift of heaven. Yeah. Yes.
But it must be proved by acts, by the thoughtfulness and reasonableness of what one thinks and says, and not by appealing to it as to an oracle, when one has nothing intelligent to adduce to justify oneself. When insight...
So then he develops the whole thing, an appeal to common sense is altogether impossible in speculative matters. We must keep this in mind and see what Kant's appeal to the moral consciousness, which is so crucial for his whole philosophy, means later on. Now, let's see the continuation of the argument in this second paragraph following.
I readily confess that the reminder of David Hume was what first interrupted my dogmatic slumber many years ago and gave my research in the field of speculative philosophy quite a different direction. I was quite far from accepting the consequences which resulted merely from his not having faced his problem squarely.
Not faith, not nicht im Ganzen, not in the whole, not altogether. He faced it only in a limited way, in a fragmentary way. Yeah?
But having only attacked a part of it, which could not possibly afford a solution by itself, when one starts to
that is then the beginning of the next paragraph.
First of all, I tried to see whether Hume's observation could not be made general, and soon found that the concept of the connection of cause and effect was not the only one, by a great deal, by which the intellect thinks a priori of the connections of things, but that metaphysics consists entirely of such concepts. I endeavored to ascertain their number, and as I succeeded in doing this to my satisfaction, namely out of a single principle, I proceeded to the deduction of these concepts, which I was now assured could not be derived from experience, as Hume had pretended, but must have originated in a pure intellect. This deduction that had seemed impossible to my acute predecessor, and that had not even occurred to anyone except him, although everyone unconcernedly used these concepts without asking on what their objective validity rested. This deduction, I say, was the most difficult problem that could ever be undertaken in the interest of metaphysics. The worst of it was that metaphysics, so far as it exists at all at present, could not afford me the least help, because the above deduction was needed to make metaphysics possible in the first place. Having now succeeded in the solution of Hume's problem, not only in one particular case, but in respect to the entire capacity of pure reason, I could at least determine more surely, though still only by slow steps, the whole range of pure reason in its limits as well as in its content. I could determine it completely according to the universal principles which are required for metaphysics in order to construct its system on a secure plan.
Thank you. Now, why did Hume limit himself to causality? I mean, here I must speak entirely from a very vague memory. Perhaps someone of you remembers it better. Hume speaks of a number, really, principles of connection of ideas. Ideas are connected by contiguity, that's one thing, cause and effect is the other, the third I forgot. And in the sentence, yeah. Thank you. Now what Hume has in mind is the special status of the principle of causality, cause and effect is this, that whereas in the two other cases of continuity and resentment, we do not go beyond the present idea. The present idea says that there is such a going beyond takes place in the case of cause and effect. The plane of the principle of cause and effect is much higher than that of continuity and resentment. This is very good in stated the reason, right? You concentrate on cause and effect. But anyway, from Kant's point of view, cause and effect, this particular way of connecting is one of many. And Kant believes he has succeeded in discovering the system of the possible connections, fundamental connections which can be made. And he arrived at that by a radical restatement of the Aristotelian teaching regarding the category and linking that up with an analysis of judgment, into which I cannot now go. That is considered read only the end of this the one passage which is important for our purpose.
We have long been accustomed to seeing old and worn-out theories remodeled by being taken out of their former covering and fitted to a systematic garment according to our own approved style but under a new title. The great majority of readers will expect nothing different from our critique. But these prolegomena will convince them that it is quite a new science of which no one had previously had the smallest conception, of which even the idea was unknown, with reference to which all hitherto received knowledge was unavailable, with the exception of the hint afforded by Hume's doubt. But Hume never dreamt of a possible formal science of this nature, and in order to...
We see here Kant's claim. It is an absolutely and entirely new science. A science never even thought of before. And hitherto unknown dimension, and even unexpected dimension, has been discovered by Kant. The question is, and Kant does not state anything about this in our present context, what exactly is that new dimension? Now, the answer to this question we will find, or at least an answer sufficient for our present purposes, we will find in the prefaces to the critique of pure reason, to which we will turn next time. But I would like to repeat all these things. The point I made before. The crucial point is that the whole problem is concentrated, what Kant calls synthetic judgment a priori. Synthetic judgment a priori. In other words, that there are necessary and evident connections which are not established by the principle of contradiction. It is not self-contradictory to question the principle of causality. And yet, it is very far from being arbitrary to observe. There is a necessity which is no longer simply logic, but a true necessity which compels us to observe the principle of causality. And therefore, this is the principle of causality is the true principle, not the principle valid on the basis of previous experience, and therefore valid only until further notice. That is the crucial point, and anything stemming from experience, which from Kant's point of view, can never be of true necessity and of true universality. It always is much implied with qualification up to now. And it is always even possible even to say that the principle of contradiction has up to now always been in fact of being acted, because what man has observed can only be a very small case. And in infinite variety of processes going on all the time, which remain absolutely unobserved, maybe all kinds of little errors. I think things there. With what right can you exclude it? And not only say, well, it's all the problem. Impossible. So, to come back to the main point, Kant's great unenterprise does not consist in exploiting Hume's critique of causality for a certain freedom, in the way in which some people now use the principle of indeterminacy in nuclear physics, of saying, here is the case of this. Kant admits, just as Hume before, there is no way of escaping absolute determinism in all our theoretical knowledge. Full agreement between Hume and Kant and Leibniz and Hobbes is to know that this is the correct position. But Kant's question, not determine what we say, but the whole sphere to which determinism congenitally belongs, the sphere of our experience, pre-scientific, scientific, and anything belonging to that. And yet that this sphere as such is in a way practical. Beyond it, there is true reality, what Kant calls feeling itself, and the only access to that which we have is the conscience. And we must then see it, next time we will then read it as the two presence.